Alrighty, welcome back. So today I want to do a follow-up from my last video yesterday about the family dynamic and the different roles that people play when you have a narcissistic parent. And today I want to talk about my role specifically that I was kind of forced into, was the scapegoat of the family. And what that is like for a child to grow up as a scapegoat with a narcissistic parent in that family dynamic, and then the effects that it had throughout my life and how I'm dealing with it to this day. So the first thing that is strange when you grow up as a scapegoat, and this is all from my experience, and then a few things I've observed from some friends of mine that had similar experience, but what ends up happening is that you're constantly vying for your parents' attention, because when you're the scapegoat, you're always getting blamed for things. A lot of pressure is put on you for things that are wrong, or you're kind of dumped on as being an inconvenience for the family, for the narcissist. And what ends up happening when you're a scapegoat child, you learn that the only way you can really get attention from your parents is by behaving badly. So what I ended up doing was falling into this cycle and this rut of the only time I get attention was if I was mean to my brother or I was just behaving poorly. And then I would receive attention, but it was always just negative. So then you just learn that to get love from your parents, you have to behave poorly, and then that's the only way you can really get it. I mean, obviously, I would receive love in other ways, but for the most part, it was getting in trouble and behaving badly, which then puts stress on your folks and your siblings, because no one wants to deal with a kid that's behaving badly, and it's kind of a vicious cycle. And what ends up happening is then, as a child, I started to develop all these feelings of insecurity based on I'm not good enough because everything's always my fault. I'm this inconvenience. I'm this kind of problem, and so something's wrong with me. So then that gets ingrained into you as a child, and then no one teaches you as a kid of how to process this emotional trauma. So then it just sticks with you, and then it becomes hardwired into your behavior. And what ended up happening was, all throughout childhood, at home, it's like an emotional roller coaster. It's either hot or cold, and it's mostly feeling like I'm an inconvenience. So then when I relate to other people, when I go to school, I'd always be feeling depressed and sad and insecure, that then I would just lash out to other kids and I'd be mean to them and put them down. And then I just became this kind of like bully. I mean, I wasn't like physically bullying them, but I was making fun of kids and being just a dick as a kid. And that's kind of what another thing I fell into from my home environment, and just trying to figure out some relief. And I would find relief by putting other people down, because that's what I was experiencing. And obviously no one likes a kid that's just mean to everyone. So then you don't have any meaningful friendships, and you're kind of just left confused. And ultimately the feeling is that you're not good enough. And as you start to grow up, you then are, I was just trying to change myself, and I thought if I could kind of be this chameleon type person, where if I could become something, like if I wanted to make a friend with someone, I would then try to be into everything that they're into, because then I think they would like me if I was more like them. So then what you end up doing is I would take on character traits from other people because I'd want them to be my friend. And, of course, the family dynamic and the narcissistic abuse doesn't end when you're living at home. It'll never end. And so then you're just growing up in that environment, reinforcing all these insecurities more and more. Then you become a teenager, and then you start trying to relate to women, and it's the same thing. You just take on personality and character traits of them and try to become a version of what you think they want you to be. And initially, that's what I was trying to do, and then you kind of attract these people that aren't good for you. And so the remedy to that when I was a teenager was just smoking weed. I started smoking weed, and it basically calmed all that down, and then it allowed me to alter my consciousness and perception to just escape all the negativity and the feelings I was feeling. So it went from being a kid of trying to relieve the pressure by being mean to other people, and then it went from being a teenager relieving all the anxiety and pressure by using drugs and just escaping. And that's what we see nowadays. That's some of the fallout that you can see from this psychological abuse that people experience. They find drugs, and it's relief because you can escape it. You're in this altered state of consciousness, and it's easy. Drugs are easily available throughout society, and it's almost glamorized in the media and Hollywood. So of course, you're going to turn to alcohol, you're going to turn to street drugs, marijuana, whatever, for some kind of relief. Because there's no one telling you how to overcome your problems that you experience. So, that was teenage years up until, I was about 35 when, my marijuana smoking and my alcoholism just became out of control, and it was like a serious threat to my just living. I was constantly putting myself in these terrible positions and making bad decisions. But, right after teenage years, into young adulthood, you're out on your own. You're trying to navigate the world. You're having girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever. And I'm relating to these people with what I know from childhood and my experience, in my family unit. So, of course, it's all based upon me changing who I am. So all the girlfriends I'd have was just me, like I said, taking on part of their personality or things they're into, and then not really being true to myself. And when you're not true to yourself, people know that. And if they're narcissistic or just kind of sociopathic people, they take advantage of you. And so then I would attract those kinds of people, because the narcissist and the sociopath, just these people that exhibit bad behavior and treat people poorly, they have this radar and this sixth sense of how to find, vulnerable people. And so then, it's many years of dealing with those types of people. And then, of course, you're in a relationship with some narcissistic woman or girl, whatever. And yeah, you're miserable, you're depressed. That was where I was at. Drinking a ton, smoking weed a ton, not happy. And then it just kind of, it just is cyclical. It happens over and over and over again. And if there's not some event that wakes you up and changes your perception of the situation, then you'll be in that for your entire life. And I know many people, and I observe people all the time, that is their situation. They're talking 50, 60 years of that, of experiencing that, and all they want to do is escape it. So, even though I had an experience that changed the way I perceived everything and was able to break free from this narcissistic abuse, the initial programming from being the scapegoat as a child is still ingrained in my behavior. And a great example, and my wife always gets on me about this, is, I'll try to press her buttons and get her upset to get attention from her, rather than just relating to her in a healthy way. Because we have a small family. We have a 6-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and she's focused on the children, and naturally the husband feels, he's not getting enough attention. So then I'll press her buttons and try to get her to get mad at me to then give me energy and attention, because I know that from childhood. So that programming is still in place. But it's interesting to observe it, and she just calls me out on it, and then we can move past it. But I don't think that ever goes away. You can try to change it and change your mindset and really work on that, but I think it's just something that's ingrained in you, and you just have to learn to live with it rather than living by it. You can't let it control you. But that's all the way up into the blocking the narcissist from my life. Like I said, these things are still prevalent. So the conditioning is there from early on, and I don't think the scapegoat will ever, you can never get out of that role of being a scapegoat unless you completely isolate yourself from your family. Because in my situation, I'm a scapegoat to my mom, my dad, and my brother. And once my parents get old and pass away, I'll just be a scapegoat to my brother, and then he'll just blame whatever thing that he feels that I've done to the family on me, and I'll just continue to be in that role, relating to him. And so, like I said, the only way is just to 100% cut yourself off, from these people, and then you can escape that role of being the scapegoat. But really, the trick is, and I think any of this trauma, is become aware of it, and then you have to learn to live with it rather than living by it. That's the whole thing. And that's the goal. That's kind of the ultimate goal of these videos and me telling you about what I've experienced. Is that's the trick with all of this, because we all experience some form of trauma, and I don't know. I don't think you can erase that trauma. And the only thing that I have found is learning about it, becoming aware, and then learning to live with it, and just accept it, and forgive yourself, and forgive other people that you need to, and you have to move forward. So, that's the overarching theme of all these videos, and I can talk more about it. But as far as being the scapegoat, yeah, it never ends, man. You gotta learn to live with it. Okay, well, thanks for watching.